What I am about to share with you today is not something the powers that be want discussed openly. And I say that not to sound dramatic, not to hook you in with mystery, but because it is a straightforward, observable, verifiable truth that becomes impossible to ignore once you begin paying attention to it. The establishment is not merely annoyed by you. It is not simply inconvenienced by your existence. It is afraid of you. Genuinely, deeply afraid. And today I am going to break down precisely why. What it is about your specific wiring, your God-placed, purpose-driven wiring, that unsettles systems that were engineered to keep people frozen in place. And more importantly, what you are supposed to do with that knowledge once you have it. But let me first be clear about what I mean when I say the system. Because I am not pointing at one organization or one institution. I am describing the entire web of structures, narratives, and patterns of behavior that were constructed to preserve a particular arrangement. An arrangement that concentrates power at the top and requires the people at the bottom to stay right where they are. An arrangement that functions best when people remain small, scattered, distracted, and dependent. Because the second people start waking up, start seeing the machinery clearly, start stepping into the fullness of who they were made to be, that arrangement becomes unstable. And people like you, people who are wired the way you are wired, are inherently destabilizing to that arrangement. Not because you are trying to be, but because everything that is true about you runs directly against what the system requires of the people it manages. Let me walk you through exactly what that means. The first thing about you that rattles the system is your ability to see past the surface. The system survives on a story it tells about itself. A story that says this is simply how the world works. This is the natural order of things. Do not question it. Do not look behind it. Just learn your place within it and keep moving. And the majority of people, exhausted from the daily weight of just keeping life together, accept that story. Not because they lack intelligence, but because challenging a story takes energy, and survival has already spent most of theirs. But you have never been wired that way. Something inside you has always registered when the story did not match reality. Something inside you has always sensed the gap between what was being presented on the surface and what was actually happening underneath. You have always seen the scaffolding holding up the performance, even when you lacked the vocabulary to describe what you were seeing. That perception, that God-installed ability to detect truth beneath the theater, is among the most threatening things a person can carry in a world that is built on theater. Because systems cannot manage people they cannot deceive. And they have never been able to fully deceive you. They tried, through educational systems that trained you what to conclude rather than how to question. Through media that packaged the official narrative and dismissed any challenge to it as irrationality. Through social environments that labeled people who noticed too much as difficult, as problems, as people who needed to fall in line. But none of it fully landed on you. Because what you see was not handed to you by the system. It was placed in you by something the system does not control. And that is the part that frightens them most. The second thing about you that frightens the system is your refusal to stay in the container they assigned you. Every structure that exists to control people uses containers. Containers defined by where you were born, what your parents had, what credentials you do or do not carry, what neighborhood shaped you, what your history looks like on paper. And the job of the container is to define the ceiling. To communicate without explicitly saying so exactly how far someone with your particular profile is allowed to go, what is realistic for someone who started where you started, what you should be aiming for given the hand you were dealt. And most people, even those who quietly resent their container, eventually make peace with the walls. Not from lack of desire, but because the system does an extraordinarily effective job of making the walls feel like physics rather than policy. But people like you have a persistent problem with containers. You keep growing past them. You keep producing outcomes that the container declared were unavailable to someone with your background and your resources and your starting conditions. You keep reaching levels that the assigned ceiling said were not for you. And every time that happens, every single time a person like you breaks through a ceiling that was supposed to be permanent, it sends an unspoken message to everyone else in that same container. The message that the walls are not laws. The message that the ceiling is a choice someone made, not a fact of the universe. The message that what was presented as fixed is actually negotiable. And that message, moving through the life of one person who refused to stay contained, has the capacity to awaken everyone watching. Systems that need people in containers cannot afford for the containers to be doubted. So they push back hardest against the people doing the doubting. Against people like you. The third thing about you that frightens the system is your direct line to a source it cannot touch. The system has understood since its earliest forms that its most dangerous opposition is people who believe their ultimate source of provision, protection, and direction is something the system has no access to. Because if you genuinely believe that the God who authored your life is the one supplying what you need, then the system's most powerful tools, its ability to create scarcity, to manufacture desperation, to make you feel that you cannot survive without its approval and access, those tools stop working on you. If you believe that the same God who rerouted rivers and multiplied what was not enough and made ways through situations that had no exit is actively involved in your specific life, then you become very difficult to hold hostage. And that degree of inner freedom represents a real threat, which is why throughout history, one of the most consistent targets of controlling structures has been the direct, personal, unmediated spiritual life of ordinary people. The faith that does not need a gatekeeper. The faith that reads for itself and draws its own conclusions. The faith that prays and receives real answers. The faith that is grounded in a God who is vastly larger than any earthly architecture. Your faith, that kind of faith, is not only personally sustaining. It is structurally disruptive. Because it means you carry a resource that the system cannot regulate, intercept, or cut off. And resources it cannot touch are resources it will always be afraid of. The fourth thing about you that frightens the system is the way you build community. People like you are natural gatherers. You pull people together. You build rooms where people feel understood, valued, named, and activated. You have a gift for recognizing what a person is carrying before they have found language for it themselves, and then calling it forward, drawing it out. And the kind of community that you build is a direct disruption to the isolation that every control system depends on. Because isolated people are far more governable. People who experience their struggles as private and personal are less likely to recognize those struggles as structural. People who are kept separate from one another by the 1,000 divisions the system uses, race, class, ideology, identity, cannot see what they share. Cannot discover that the same machinery has been operating on all of them in the same way. But when someone like you starts pulling people together, when people start realizing they are not alone, when they begin comparing their experiences and seeing the patterns, something begins that is very difficult to stop. So people like you who build that kind of community encounter a particular flavor of resistance. Attempts to damage your credibility before the community fully forms. Attempts to introduce conflict, suspicion, and fracture into the spaces you have built. Attempts to make you turn on each other before you can fully turn toward your shared purpose. Recognize that for exactly what it is. Not random friction. Targeted disruption. The fifth thing about you that frightens the system is your creativity. Original, God-sourced creativity is one of the most quietly radical forces in existence. Because creativity generates alternatives. And what systems cannot survive is the widespread belief in alternatives. The system needs you to see it as the only architecture. The only pathway. The only structure worth operating within. Because the moment you begin genuinely imagining other arrangements, different ways of organizing resources and relationships and power, you begin to see that what exists is not inevitable. It is just a decision that someone made. And decisions that were made can be unmade or remade by someone else. People like you with their God-given creative vision are constantly seeing what is not there yet. Building things that the system said could not be built. Finding exits where the system said there were none. Creating structure where the system said there was only void. Every person like you who builds something outside the existing framework, every community, every enterprise, every solution, every art form, proves that the system is not the only option. And that proof, multiplied across many lives, is genuinely threatening to any structure that has staked its authority on being the only viable choice. The sixth thing about you that frightens the system is how hard you are to break. Control systems depend on the ability to wear people down. Not always dramatically, not always through direct confrontation, but through sustained pressure. Financial strain. Social exclusion. The slow accumulation of messaging that says you are not enough, that your voice does not count, that your presence is a problem. The system applies that pressure and then waits for it to produce compliance. And that strategy works on most people. Not because people are fragile, but because the pressure is intelligently designed to exceed normal human endurance. But people like you who have walked through fires that should have ended them and somehow kept walking do not break on the system's schedule. They feel the weight. They struggle under it. But something holds. Something does not give. And people who cannot be fully broken cannot be fully controlled. The system understands this well. And every time someone like you survives something that was supposed to finish them, every time they recover from a setback that was designed to be permanent, the system notes it and redoubles its efforts. Because a resilient person who keeps rising is a living argument against every tool in the control playbook. The seventh thing about you that frightens the system is your voice. Specifically the voice that has not been processed and sanitized by institutional permission. Not the version of your voice that was shaped by environments that taught you to speak carefully around the structures that owned the room. Your actual voice. The one that comes from the lived experience of having been underneath the very systems you are now in a position to describe. That voice, when it is fully extended, does something that no press release or official communication can replicate. It reaches people in the exact place where they have been carrying something that has never had a name. It lands in the place where someone has always known something was wrong but never encountered anyone who could say it the way they needed to hear it said. Your voice, telling the truth from the specific vantage point that only your particular path qualifies you to occupy, gives language to things that have been wordless. And things that have been given language can be addressed. Systems that have been named can be questioned. Wrongs that have been articulated can be organized against. Which is precisely why the effort to quiet your voice has been so persistent and so strategic. Not because your voice is too aggressive. Because it is too accurate. Now let me describe the specific methods the system uses to neutralize this threat, because understanding the methods is what shifts you from being repeatedly blindsided by them to responding to them with clarity and intention. The first method is discrediting. Before your message can find its audience, before your voice can reach the people who need it, the effort is made to make you personally seem disqualifying. To surface your past, your errors, the person you were before you became who you are. The goal is not accountability. The goal is distraction. If the conversation can be redirected from what you are saying, which is dangerous, to what you have done, which can be made to look disqualifying, the message gets buried. It works on people who have not yet learned to hold the message and the messenger separately. But it cannot make the truth untrue. Truth does not lose its integrity based on who is carrying it. The second method is co-opting. When discrediting fails because the message has already taken root, the strategy shifts. Instead of fighting the influence, the system tries to absorb it. An invitation is extended. A platform, a title, a seat at a table that once excluded you. Access that was previously denied. And it comes wrapped in the language of opportunity and recognition, which makes it genuinely seductive, especially for someone who has spent years being pushed to the margins. But the price of the invitation is almost always the same. Soften the edges. Make the message manageable. Deliver it in a way that challenges nothing structurally. And someone who accepts that trade has been neutralized more completely than any attack could have managed. The table is only worth sitting at if you can still say what you were sent to say while sitting there. The third method is exhaustion. The system does not always need a dramatic moment to defeat someone. Sometimes it simply manufactures enough friction, enough bureaucratic obstruction, enough constant low-level difficulty, that the person gradually runs out of fuel. Not one thing breaks them. The aggregate does. And when someone is operating from a place of deep depletion, the vision contracts. The courage diminishes. The voice gets quieter. And the system gets what it wanted without ever landing a decisive blow. Recognize exhaustion as a deliberate tactic. Respond to it not with more effort but with intentional rest, with community, with the long view that pace matters more than speed. The fourth method is isolation. The system works to separate people like you from each other. From the communities where your gifts are understood. From the spaces where your voice is received and your calling is affirmed. Because one voice reaching across isolation reaches fewer people than voices speaking from genuine connection. The system introduces whatever it can find to divide you from each other. Comparison, competition, offense, disagreement amplified into rupture. Anything that turns the energy of people like you inward against each other instead of outward toward shared purpose. Do not let that tactic succeed. Pursue genuine connection even when it feels risky. Even when community has disappointed you before. Because the version of you that is genuinely connected to others who carry what you carry is categorically more powerful than the version operating alone. Now here is what you do with all of this, because information that does not change anything is just additional weight, and I am not interested in adding to what you are already carrying. I want you to become more effective. Stop editing yourself down to make the establishment comfortable. I know this one will land somewhere deep because so much of your life has involved strategic shrinking. Making yourself just small enough, just quiet enough, just unthreatening enough to be tolerated in spaces that were never actually designed for you. And the shrinking never purchased the safety it promised because the system is not threatened by your behavior. It is threatened by your nature. And no adjustment in behavior changes your nature. It only means that less of your nature reaches the world. Stop making that trade. Not to be confrontational, not to perform boldness, but because the world genuinely needs the full version of you. Not the version that passed the system's approval process. The actual version. Use your voice now. Not after more preparation. Not when the platform is bigger. Not when the conditions feel more favorable. No. in the spaces you currently have access to, with the audience you currently have. Because the system is counting on the gap between now and ready. It is banking on you feeling too uncertain, too unqualified, too small to speak until the moment passes. Every day you wait for perfect conditions is a day that gap works in the system's favor. Speak now in whatever form that takes for you. Write, build, teach, create, organize, connect. Whatever your voice looks like in practice, start using it now. Build outside the existing framework where you can. Not every system rewards engagement from within. Some systems are better answered by the existence of an alternative than by the effort of reform from inside. And that creative capacity you carry, the ability to see what does not yet exist and begin constructing it, is precisely what building alternatives requires. What would it look like if you built the thing you have been waiting for permission to access? What if the community you cultivated became the very resource the system kept telling you it was in charge of providing? What if your faith and your gifts and your vision became the foundation of something that existed entirely outside the structures that were never intended to serve you? Build it. The system that fears your presence cannot stop you from building what it does not control. Guard your inner peace with real intention. Because a destabilized person is a less effective person, and the system knows this. A significant portion of what it does is aimed at keeping you agitated, reactive, operating from fear or anger or the constant scramble to respond to the latest provocation. Peace is not weakness. It is not disengagement. It is a strategic advantage. The person who sees everything clearly and remains unshaken is one of the most disorienting forces the system has to contend with, because the system has no protocol for someone who cannot be rattled into reacting. Hold your peace deliberately. Stay rooted in God because everything the system finds threatening about you flows from that connection. The perception, the resilience, the voice, the creativity, the community-building instinct, the refusal to accept the container, all of it at its deepest root is the nature and the purpose of God expressing itself through you in the world. And the moment you drift from that root, the moment you begin running purely on your own reserves of energy and wisdom and determination, you become something the system can eventually outlast. Your own capacity has limits. The source that placed you here and commissioned you for this does not. Stay close to that source through prayer, through scripture, through the ongoing specific intimate relationship with the God who selected you for this particular moment in history. Because everything that frightens the system about you is most completely expressed when you are most completely connected to the one who designed it. I want to close with something I want you to hold on to at a level deeper than just thought. The fact that the system is afraid of you is not a burden you are supposed to carry. It is a confirmation. It confirms that what you carry is real, that the gift is significant, that the calling is genuine, that the assignment reaches beyond the borders of your own life. Systems do not mobilize against things that pose no threat. They do not organize opposition against the ordinary. The fact that your presence, your specific God-designed, purpose-loaded presence, disturbs structures that were built to keep people manageable is itself evidence that you were not designed to be manageable. You were built for something that no system was ever going to be large enough to contain. And no system, regardless of how entrenched it is, regardless of how long it has been operating, regardless of how much institutional weight it carries, can contain what God released into the world when He placed you here. Walk in that. Not with arrogance. Not as a posture of aggression. But with the settled, unshakable, quiet confidence of someone who knows at a cellular level that they were not placed here to fit into what already exists. They were placed here to build what has not yet been built. To say what has not yet been said. To reach who has not yet been reached. To disturb exactly what needs disturbing. And to do all of it under the covering of a God who is greater than every structure that has ever been assembled, or ever will be. Walk in that. The system is afraid of your presence. Let it be. If this reached you somewhere real today, share it right now with someone who needs to understand why their life has met the resistance it has met. Drop a comment and tell me where you have felt the pushback most personally. I read all of them, every single one. If you're new here, welcome. Stay rooted. Stay building. Because the system that fears your presence has already lost. It simply has not accepted it yet.